How does a radio wave pass through walls? And as a consequence of this question, that's a different question. How does a Wi-Fi signal pass through walls? And why can you place an access point in one room and receive the signal in another room, or even 2 rooms away from that room? A radio wave is an oscillation of a certain medium. Given the word wave, it's easy to imagine that it's somewhat like a mechanical wave. The same thing happens with radio waves, but no one can say exactly what is oscillating. Some say it is ether, which supposedly represents a substance surrounding us, existing in the universe, existing everywhere, and which is essentially the medium through which the radio wave or other electromagnetic oscillations are transmitted. Some say that it is simply an electromagnetic oscillation that exists in an electromagnetic field. Let's take a grid, take a bucket of water, pour the bucket of water onto the grid, and we see that the grid lets the water through. Now let's imagine that there is some medium around us that is capable of conducting radio waves. It doesn't matter what we call it, ether or electromagnetic field or anything else. Let it just be a medium that exists. For understanding the issue we are currently discussing, this is not so important. And we take, for example, a wall and understand that this medium seems to be able to pass through this wall. But the question immediately arises, how does this happen? But why don't you have the same question when we talk about radioactive radiation? When we talk about radio waves, for some reason, the question arises, how does a radio wave pass through an object? And accordingly, when we talk, for example, about radiation, it turns out that the analogy of water with a sieve fits best. We take a wooden sample, pass gamma radiation through it, and the gamma radiation passes through the sample like water through a sieve. Now, for understanding, let's take light and a transparent object. Let's take glass and the most ordinary sunlight. Sunlight passes through an object and is partially reflected, partially refracted, and partially transmitted through it. For some reason, this process of passing through doesn't raise questions for most of us, even though technically it's the same as a wave passing through a wall. We take a wall, the wall has a certain structure, and within this structure there is space suitable for the passage of a radio wave. If this space does not experience any changes from the structure of the substance and does not press against this wave in any way, then the radio wave passes through objects as if the object does not exist. And the example with sunlight fits best here because sunlight can pass through glass but cannot pass through a brick wall. Similarly, a radio wave can pass through a brick wall but cannot pass through a lead wall. The specific arrangement of atoms in the structure of the sample allows certain energies to pass through or be blocked in a particular way when they hit these atoms from above. When energy hits the surface of the sample, many interesting phenomena can occur. For example, reflection, which we discussed separately. What was it about? We found that energy is partially absorbed and partially reflected, and in the case of refraction, the particles give such an internal response that the energy, having entered the sample and penetrated through the top layer, starts to jostle and refract. But what happens in the case of transmission? In the case of transmission, it turns out that some part of the energy is dissipated, and some part of the energy passes through. All these examples are applicable to our case with our radio waves.